Channel.
It's been a tumultuous few months in Australian politics, where this week voters cast their ballots in the nation's federal election. The Conservative Liberal Party, headed by Tony Abbott, came to power after a substantial swing against the country's Labor government. The events have been the latest in the unpredictable and volatile atmosphere that has marked the nation's politics this past few months. Here's my report on the nation's election. Tony Abbott, described as the unelectable man, has won the so-called unlosable election in a landslide coalition victory against the Australian Labor Party with a marginal difference of more than 30 seats in the House of Representatives. This is the worst defeat of the Australian Labor Party in more than 100 years. Citizens were affected by the scandals and infighting, which have been such a source of embarrassment to the Labor Party, with sudden leadership changes meaning that Kevin Rudd has served as Prime Minister twice in the last 3 years. Issues like refugee policy, the economy, and policies of conscience like same-sex marriage also mattered to voters. Mr. Rudd has supported the push for state recognition not just of civil unions, but of full same-sex marriage equality. While the victorious Liberal Party's Mr. Abbott has withheld his support on same-sex marriage, he has been vocal in his economic policies. Cuts to taxation and government spending have been promised by the Australian Liberal Party in the lead-up to the election. Policies on the processing of refugees and asylum seekers have been particularly important to the public. Both major parties present different takes on similar offshore processing solutions. The Conservative Liberal Party has suggested a more hardline tactic in Mr. Abbott's claim that he would turn back the boats. Australian parties have also proposed foreign policies toward the Middle East, especially Egypt and Syria.
Well, it's always been our policy to provide the support through our refugee and humanitarian program, particularly the special humanitarian program for those who are persecuted in Egypt as Copts, to be able to find safe haven here in Australia and to join many of their own community here who have made such an extraordinary contribution to our country. 100,000 Copts here within Australia provide the best example of Australia's success as a multi-ethnic society, and we want to extend that opportunity to those who have really suffered in Egypt, and that's what a coalition government will do, as we always did when we were last in government.
They'll lose their rights, yeah, and it's up to them. I don't think anyone should do that. I think if they force the situation, they're the ones who will suffer. But then that would make it very difficult, though, to have a peaceful Egypt if there's a minority very angry that they don't have equal rights with other people.
Yes. And just a couple more. What are your hopes for Egypt going forward, and do you have any comments on the situation in Syria?
Well, I'm very confident about Egypt because I think through all the upheavals it has united the people, putting the Muslim Brotherhood to one side, but it has united the people in a remarkable way, especially the moderate Muslims and the Christian community. For the first time have really bonded together, because that's what the protests were made up. They weren't just Christian protests or Muslim protests. They were combined. And I hope that cooperation will now continue into the future.
We join them in their condemnation of this tragic loss of life, but having done that, we urge restraint on both sides. The international community stands ready to broker an agreement that would see political reconciliation. I think talking between the Muslim Brotherhood and the government is the way to go, with a compromise that follows that, the release of political prisoners, the opportunity for the people of Egypt in an unimpeachably fair and transparent election.
Political effectiveness can be a hard task to master. On the one hand, Western nations must be sure to represent their own nation's interests, and on the other, they must be careful not to unbalance the delicate and loaded political tensions that exist in the Middle East. Australian politicians try their hand in the Egyptian situation here at Sydney's Parliament House. Daniel Noor, CYC News.